Hello, this is Niswander of the NOWMAN show, and I'm here at Politicon in Pasadena this year. We just saw a Bernie Sanders panel with a lot of heated discussion, even feedback from the audience. It was pretty interesting. This panel included actor, radio show host Hal Sparks, also Ana Kasparian from the Young Turks, Paul Bagaya, Bill Burton, who actually in the past had managed the Obama Super PAC Priorities USA action, and more. Lively crowd, lively event. We're going to cover some other events right now here at Politicon 2016. Right now! Hello, this is Niswander of the NOWMAN show, and I'm here at Politicon with actor and radio show host and bon vivant, Hal Sparks. How are you, man?
I'm spectacular, but I'll get better.
You will get better?
Oh, yeah. There's always room for improvement no matter how good you're doing.
That's fantastic, even on a good bad day.
Yeah. That seems like an oxymoron, a good bad day.
I did that on purpose.
But you know what? I actually think that most people have good bad days and bad good days.
I agree.
Yeah, so that's okay. All right, we'll operate on that premise. I like it.
So how would you evaluate the Bernie Sanders campaign panel that we just witnessed?
It was good. It was my only issue with it was when the Bernie fans were booing numbers. You can complain about his media coverage. You can complain about his ideas not getting afloat or any of those elements. You can even complain about something that other people have said about him that you disagree with. But the numbers are the numbers. People voted for Hillary, but they voted, beyond superdelegates, she won the number of delegates, period. So don't boo the numbers. Just be upset and work next time to have more numbers, I suppose.
Well, it's definitely an establishment kind of non-establishment election season right now. That's what we are seeing.
Yeah.
And 45% of the people, which are about 13 million people, did vote for Bernie Sanders. And we also know at the same time, all the way back to the Iowa caucus, it was decided by a coin toss. And immediately, the Hillary campaign was talking about how Sanders supporters should join her. And every mainstream media interview that I've seen, and I've seen probably 1,000 in that time, they keep hounding him for whatever the question is of the day. Lately, it's been, are you going to vote for Hillary Clinton? And they won't let it go.
But they do that with every single Democratic primary candidate who loses in every and in every Republican one, for that matter. They've done it with every single Republican about, will you support Donald Trump? Have they not? There's been a wall of people. All 18 of them have been corralled, the ones that matter, have been corralled by the press. Are you going to support Donald Trump? Same thing with Paul Ryan initially, who being outspoken against, that's not going to be the guy who owns our party. Now that he is, are you going to vote for him? Bernie doesn't get to dodge that question just because he's Bernie. Hillary was asked the exact same thing when she lost to Barack.
Correct. But when we talk about...
Earlier, by the way.
Correct. But there's a lot of different factors. In some ways you can compare the past, with the present. In other ways you can't. This is a very unique season. It's like we have seen literally, I've interviewed the economist Richard Wolff, and he talked about how thousands of people were locked into the idea of getting money out of politics, ending foreclosures, the income inequality with Occupy Wall Street. Now, this same kind of message, there's millions of people on board. There are millennials who are now older than they were back then, who also can see the maturity of the internet and get more information off the internet and decide for themselves what they think the truth is and what the distortions are. Sure. So now this group is growing in large numbers. Right. They get it. Yep. And so there is
becoming their own establishment.
That's correct.
That's what it is. That's the process of political growth in every country that has any kind of political growth available to it. You start small, oftentimes disruptive. You build a structure, you run candidates, you win or lose, you build on the successes of those candidates. Nobody special. That's how the Whigs disappeared and the Republicans appeared. It's how the Democratic Party existed. It's actually, quite frankly, how the Democrats and the Republicans in 1964 swapped names. The modern Republican Party is the Dixiecrats pre-1964, pre-Civil Rights Act.
Well, some people would think that what we have now is... Do you know who Chris Hedges is?
Yeah.
Okay, he believes that what the Clintons did in the 1990s was pull the Democratic Party more to the right. So now that those people that we call the Republican, the Reagan Republicans, are now all the way to the right, to the far right. So what we have seen ideologically through the media, through establishment politics and economics, we have seen this message kind of pulled to the right. So now you see this new young, but not only young, group of non-establishment voters and supporters of a candidate called Bernie Sanders. Imagine that, voting for a 74-year-old grandfather. Who would have thought of that even 5 years ago at Occupy?
Well, Ron Paul. I mean, it's absolutely, this is
a whole different thing.
No, it isn't.
Much larger crowd.
No, not necessarily. There was a big argument that Ron Paul should have won a bunch of primaries that he didn't win because the establishment wasn't for him on the Republican side. He won CPAC straw poll after CPAC straw poll and never gets his due. He's an old grandpa. He's a bit doddering. He's very, I don't like him. I don't like his policies, but mechanically, it's very similar to actually the Bernie appeal.
Correct, but like I say,
in terms of Chris Hedges, what he's saying, I disagree vehemently. I think post-Reagan, after Clinton, understand where the Republican and the Democratic parties were in the 90s. Carter had been one-term president. Reagan comes in, 8 years, 4 years of Bush. The country had had 3 terms of Republicans. And the Democrats were lined up with an unknown, Bill Clinton, governor of Arkansas, running against George W. Bush for a second term in the middle of the original Iraq-Kuwait dust-up, with war on his back and the Cold War still, in the taillights. This idea that Republicans represent both economic stability, greed is good, and Wall Street is sound at that point. It had not had a collapse on the level of the late 90s and 2008. They were still under the illusion that it was a functional system. Trickle-down had not been called out as the BS it was.
Well, some of us did, and when I lived overseas in the 80s, they definitely were very aware of it.
What the Clintons did was, quote-unquote, by moving to the center, moving the country, quote-unquote, to the right in Chris Hedges' kind of concept, was actually to lure what were conservative Democrats back away from the Reagan situation.
I think
ended up doing it. He ended up getting elected for 2 cycles. It ended up, it kind of fits in with the idea of, people can get angry about don't ask, don't tell, but at the time it was mitigatory. The other option was, with who was controlling the House and the Senate, the other option was let people continue to get drummed out of the military and get thrown into jail. So what do? If you can't solve it, do you just go down fighting and shaking your fist, or do you actually try to go, okay, let's take one step up the ladder?
But would you say, though, that with what legislation that was passed, even in the early years of the Clinton administration, you had NAFTA, which was a disaster. You had also the Omnibus Crime Bill, disaster. You had the Welfare Reform Act, which was gutting it, not helping the poor people. And then later on, you had the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and then the final nail in Glass-Steagall, repealing that and creating derivatives.
But again,
so how would you just
policies of the Clinton White House? Those were reflective of how of what the Senate proposed, and they were run by the Republicans.
But it was Democrats that worked with the Republicans to make those things happen, as you alluded to, right?
You don't also take a hands-off position. You're in committee. Here's what happens: you're in committee you're on 4 to 6 in a committee. You're a Democrat. This bill is being crafted by the committee. Do you walk out and refuse to be on the committee, or do you help draft it? Do you try to get what you need? No,
that depends. Because if you want to be a successful politician, that's what you will do.
Or represent your people. If you want to represent your constituents, do you just walk out of the room and you go and let it get passed without any of your input?
Who are your constituents?
Your voters.
Who are the voters? The people who represent the establishment, or the people that are just the average person?
I'm talking you as a Democrat. Let's say work with me on this analogy so you understand what I'm talking about. You're a Democrat from Vermont. You're totally liberal, and you've been you're in the minority in the Senate. You're on a committee. They are voting on welfare reform. You have 2 options. Throw your hands up and say, this is a corrupt process, and I'm not going to be a part of it, and let them draft it entirely, or try in the committee to do everything you can to affect a bill you know is going to get passed because you don't have the numbers. Do you participate? And if you don't, then how dare you say that was a bad decision when you actually had the ability to affect it?
Right. Well, I think that says a lot about the American people. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest and in the South, And I know that there's a lot of people there that don't do their homework. I didn't do my homework for a long, long time.
Sure.
And even
Does that make them evil? Does that mean they wanted welfare reform to hurt people? No, they bought the line. Right. They hoped it would work out. They thought, okay, there's some provisions in here I'm for, provisions I'm against, but it turned out to be just like trickle-down economics. That in theory, from a distance, a lot of people, liberals and progressives included, if you'd never heard of it before and you didn't know its attachment to Reaganomics, you'd go, oh yeah, if I became rich, I'd give to the poor.
Well, that's wouldn't you think that's an assumption, though?
It didn't play out that way. That's my point. But it doesn't make the people who thought it would play out that way evil. You just have to recognize that. And the question you have to say: if somebody did that, did they learn from their lesson or not? Hillary, it's like Hillary's Iraq vote. Hillary has said she regrets the Iraq vote and she would not do it again with the information, knowing now if she had known then what she knew now, she wouldn't have voted that way.
What about Honduras and the arms deals with Kuwait and Qatar?
I will. Don't move the goalpost. Let's talk about. I'm giving an example of these things. She regretted the vote. She said it openly, and she wouldn't do it again. It's very easy for the populace now to hold her to account for that particular thing. If you just gave the protest vote, you thought, you know what, we probably should invade this. But my constituents will fry me if I vote for it. Right. So
see, and that's part of the problem, right?
So I'm going to vote against it because I know it's going to go through. But now I can stand on that. I was the one who said no at the time. And even if it does go through, I know there'll be enough muck involved in whatever bill goes through. There'll be enough people who don't like it. I can go, I voted against it because of this little provision. That gets me off the hook. Every bill has enough in it where somebody can justify a no vote. The Republicans have actually run their entire system that way.
Right.
So my thing is, I don't hang all that around the necks of the Clintons like people want to. I hang it on the necks of the voters.
Well, I say it goes hand in hand, but I know exactly what you're saying.
Because Bernie, here's a good example. Love Bernie. However, Bernie ran for mayor, ran against guns, lost. Ran for state senate, changed his vote, didn't run against guns, was about not letting people get voted against the Brady Bill 5 times, all that kind of stuff. Has his entire time he's been there, his argument is, well, I'm in Vermont, it's a rural state. And if it's your conscience, vote your conscience. Don't say, I'm in a rural state. I've said to my voters, look, I know how you guys feel about this, but we're talking about the rest of the country, and I'm a senator representing you and an entire group of human beings. He didn't do that. He voted with what would keep him in office. There's nothing wrong with that, because the good that he's been able to do outweighs the negative aspect of his singular vote.
Now there is the important point that I would like to make on that issue of the guns, because that, to me, as I see it from all I've evaluated, is the actual fact. Now,
how do you mean?
Now, well, because his vote, and he's also admitted publicly that he's learned this and that from traveling around the country. He's learned all kinds of things, from being at Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, to being in West Virginia, to going to Indianapolis and meeting with the people there that worked for Carrier, on and on and on. He's learned a lot of things about this country they didn't know before. And that was his goal coming into this campaign season in the first place. So he did do that, as he promised he would and he wanted to do. He wasn't expecting this huge groundswell of support to be as big as it was, which, by the way, over 1,900 delegates are going to the convention. And there's also 13 million people that actually did vote for him, even with all the election fraud, voter suppression issues that we saw around the country. There were certain things that we even can see on video.
Alleged.
Did you see the electronic voting machines? There's all kinds of things that can happen. And yes, it's alleged, but it does make you think, and that's the whole point of why we do this show, is to think, and to give you a voice as well.
That's why you say alleged, to keep thinking.
To keep thinking so that we don't just stop. So you do progressive radio, and you're also a stand-up comic. Right. So what's coming up next for you?
I'm on tour. I'm always perpetually on tour. I'm a stand-up comedian. There's no, it never ends. It's not like a band where you have to put an album out and then you got to tour on it. It's just the life on the road of a stand-up comedian. But I'm also, my son's 5 now, and I pocket the time that I'm on the road so that I have the most amount of time that I can possibly have with him. And, that's the biggest contribution, I think, in many ways you can make to the future, because you're going to turn a human being loose in the world that after you're gone is continuing to make an impact. So.
And that's fantastic. Congratulations, actually.
Yeah, he's amazing.
I'm sure he is.
Yeah.
I don't have any children, but I do.
Know of.
That's a good point, actually. So, Hal, thank you so much for being on the NOWMAN Show. Absolutely. And this is Niswander, and you've been watching the NOWMAN Show with Hal Sparks.
That's right. Get used to it. Cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's good. Hello, this is Niswander. I'm here at Politicon, and I'm with Chris Skellinger from Team Bernie LA. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So what did you think? We just saw a panel discussion about the Bernie Sanders campaign. What are your first thoughts?
There was only one Bernie Sanders supporter on the entire panel. Thank you, Ana Kasparian, for being there, because otherwise we would have had no representation for Bernie supporters. It was really strange to be in the room with a bunch of people very negative towards Bernie and his campaign.
Well, and the discussion is still based on the establishment's perspective of what happened, correct?
Exactly. As Bernie supporters, we tend to not watch mainstream media. We tend to go elsewhere for our news and information. So when we had a panel of 6 people, but 5 people pushing these mainstream media narratives in our face, it was insulting. It really was insulting that they didn't care about our position. They only cared about their spun opinion of it. We can judge a society by how we treat its lesser individual, or its most vulnerable, and that's what Bernie supporters are about. I think we're about looking beyond maybe our means or their means, and how can we make the world a better place through policy and through talking to each other. And it was really strange on the panel because that sort of energy just was missing.
Right. And I thought also too the discussion about incremental change, as in what would be called progressive or even radical change, which is really not radical change, but if you look at it, it's more like mainstream FDR politics and economics. So the discussion of how can we get rid of incremental change wasn't even part of this conversation.
No, the incremental change was kind of like, this is what you should be expecting. People didn't want a revolution. When I feel like people need a revolution in this country, even if they don't realize it, even if they haven't gone as deep as some of us have as to how we're being manipulated, who's doing the manipulation, and where we can get true information. It's so hard to find true information these days. And that panel was kind of under the assumption that everything's fine, the media's great, there's nothing going on.
So thank you, Chris, for speaking to us and letting us be able to share a perspective, a millennial perspective, I may say, which, but there are many...
Millennial perspective.
Yeah. But there are many older people who share that perspective.
Absolutely. I think that this movement is a convergence of the suffrage movement, the women's rights movement, the civil rights movement, Occupy movement. It's a political revolution that we must have. And that panel was against the revolution, and to be on a Bernie panel, which his whole thing has been about the revolution, about this movement to get the money out of politics. The whole gamut of his campaign was all about this, and they were under the assumption that all of us Bernie supporters were just about Bernie. It's never been about Bernie. It's always been about the movement. Period.
That's correct, and a revolution happened in 1800 with an election, so why couldn't it happen now?
It needs to.
Thank you, Chris. This is Niswander. I'm with Chris Skellinger on the NOWMAN Show. I just did a great interview with media pundit and author Ann Coulter. Hello, this is Niswander of the NOWMAN Show, and I'm here at Politicon with Ann Coulter. Ann, how are you today?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing great as well. I got some questions about this election season for you. Okay, do you have any idea at all who Donald Trump might be picking as his vice presidential running mate?
I have some suggestions.
Oh, that'd be great.
My number one suggestion is Chris Kobach. That's probably why you won't pick him. Most people draw a blank at that. He's the Secretary of State of Kansas. Harvard undergrad, Yale Law School, Oxford, young, attractive, tall, obviously brilliant. He wrote E-Verify, the law that allows employers to check within 2 seconds, am I employing an American? He wrote what was smeared, defamed, slandered as the Papers, Please law in Arizona, which, oh, by the way, was upheld by the Supreme Court. So he's very solid on the most important issue in this election, which is immigration. And incidentally, I wrote a book on Trump, just finished editing it the other night. It's coming out August 23rd. In Trump We Trust.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
So you will know a lot more about what I think about Trump when that book comes out.
So what do you think? Do you think that Trump will make an impact on the Republicans keeping the House?
It's interesting. Everyone's looking at this, I think, completely the wrong way. I was very confident Trump would get the nomination. I think he has an excellent chance of winning the presidency, but we'll see. Republicans, they all say, oh, it's going to be a landslide against Trump. He'll take down the down. No. It's not going to be a landslide against him. It may be that Democrats have brought in enough ringers now that no Republican can win nationally, that the country has become California. And okay, at least I'll know with Donald Trump. But what Trump is doing, as we've seen in primary after primary, is bringing out people who haven't voted for 20 or 30 years. He's getting Democrats just
like Bernie Sanders is.
Yes, he is getting Democrats to switch their registration to vote for him. And by the way, I think Trump gets the working class Bernie Sanders voters. You won't get the social justice warriors because they're idiot college kids. They'll do whatever they're told. But I think Trump picks up a portion of Sanders' vote. Now, by my idiot party, or what they think of as the party, it's the Trump party now. They've been left behind. If they keep attacking him, it could well be that Trump wins the presidential election, but Republicans lose the House and the Senate. Because people are just going to say, screw it, they don't support their own nominee. I'll vote for Trump and go home.
That's right. Speaking of the election, who do you think will be the winner?
I mean, as I say, that's why we have elections. I think Trump is more than 50% likely to win, but that still leaves a big possibility that he doesn't. I really think he's an incredibly appealing candidate, which is why the media is going crazy. He's not frightening to swing voters. He's not frightening to soccer moms. He doesn't have religious ecstasies on stage.
That's right.
He doesn't speak in tongues. He is going after Wall Street. He is going after the hedge fund managers. All the usual things they say about Republicans do not work, and he has raised the most important issue that will help everyone living here, including immigrants, and that is building the wall, shutting down this dump of low-wage workers on America, which is hurting America's working class and middle class.
And ending the TPP.
Yes, and the trade deals. Oh my gosh, he's finally running on popular issues.
Thank you so much, Ann, for being on the NOWMAN Show.
August 23rd.
Name of the book?
August 23rd, In Trump We Trust.
Thank you.
Yes.
Welcome to the Bernie panel.
What happened? Why was Bernie so successful? Why could he not actually win the nomination?
I think part of the reason. Well, I think a lot of the excitement that you're seeing surrounding Bernie, not just in the election, but also obviously in this crowd, is because he managed to give a voice to those who felt disenfranchised in the country, that felt frustrated by a corrupt political system that we're all dealing with income inequality, with student loan debt, all these issues that politicians use as talking points during their campaigns, but don't actually follow through on when they get elected. And someone like Bernie Sanders did what he said he would do. He wouldn't take campaign contributions from massive corporations. He took small donations. Average amount was about $27, as we all know. I think he did really well in his campaign, but as we know from leaked documents and the way some things turned out during the primaries, it was very clear that there was a huge establishment that wasn't backing him up. The establishment, the DNC, had already decided who their candidate was, and there were a number of strategies that were implemented throughout the process that I think worked against him. But the people have spoken. They want change. They want our system to change. And I think as long as we continue fighting it, we can do it.
Well, what do you think about? And I want to deal actually with the young lady's point about the media
Yes.
shaping
I'd love
this
to talk about
decision. Do you think that? Let's focus on folks on the left who are talking to folks on the left through television.
Let's have 6 people in media discuss.
Yeah, I mean, did those of us in media make this decision for the electorate or not?
All right. I think that the way the media covered Bernie Sanders' campaign from the beginning definitely did impact the way people voted. Whether the media knowingly did it or unknowingly did it, it's clear. I mean, the fact that the Associated Press and
Oh, I'm
NBC...
sorry. Does it matter, as a professional journalist, does
Yes.
it matter that we're talking about conscious bias or unconscious bias? Like,
It absolutely does matter, but
Yeah.
it's difficult for me to sit here and say, oh, they absolutely 100% knew what they were doing. Look, the establishment media, the traditional media, loves one thing, and that's access to the establishment, okay? Established politicians, people like Hillary Clinton, people like Donald Trump, which is why Donald Trump is able to call into CNN whenever he wants, and he doesn't actually have to show up. He gets to say what he wants to say without going unchallenged. And so when you have, let's say, the Associated Press or NBC reporting a day before the primary is supposed to take place in California, telling the voters that Hillary's already won, you guys can all screw off, right? I'm paraphrasing, they didn't actually say that, but that's what it felt like. It discourages people from going out there and voting. But that's just one example. You have the Washington Post publishing 16 negative Bernie headlines in one day. And so there's a reason why Bernie Sanders has so many young supporters, because there's a big difference between how older voters consume their news and younger voters consume their news.
traditional media versus what?
Digital media, which of course that's what I'm part of. But you have digital media doing very different coverage of the elections, very different from what you would see on CNN, for example, right? You don't have digital media outlets talking about super delegates and counting them as if they've already voted, right? And so when you have in-depth analysis on the policy issues, for instance, Bernie's plan on education is much better than Hillary's plan on education, but you don't see those debates in the mainstream press. And so that's why you have older people who, by the way, are comfortable with the system that we're already in. They already have their houses, they already have their careers, they're cool, they're chilling, right? But when it comes to people in my generation, we are not chilling, and we're consuming our results.
There's another poor man who lives down the street who doesn't have the money for new shoes on his feet. He works hard